I looked at the hand in the vending machine, stunned. It stood on a rack, seen through the glass shield, as if it were a piece of candy someone would want to purchase. Behind it, I saw a line of candy bars stretching to the back. I heard the chatter of my co-workers in the break room behind me. I glanced up and down the hall, looking for the culprit. I expected to hear someone yell, "April Fools!" or something along those lines, even though it wasn't April. But as I leaned closer to the hand, I realized that this hand wasn't some Halloween store prop or a piece of a mannequin. It was dripping blood, dark, clotted drops of it. The fingers had curled up like a dead, desiccated spider, the nails blackened and falling off the skin. A jagged piece of arm bone stuck out the bottom of the wrist. Dried shreds of tendons and ligaments still clung to the yellowed pole of a bone. I screamed. Everyone in the break room went deathly quiet. I could hear the ticking of the air conditioning, the rattling of vents in the walls, but for a few seconds, not a single human voice echoed throughout the floor. "Henry?" someone said from behind me. I saw the secretary, Alexis, standing at the threshold of the break room. She was undoubtedly the most beautiful woman in the office, with her blue eyes, pale skin, and long blonde hair that rippled around her shoulders in light, scintillating waves. A smell like peaches and honey emanated from her lithe body. Seeing her face calmed me slightly, yet shivers of anxiety and fear still ran up and down my back. It was more than just the hand. Invisible electricity seemed to sizzle in the air, as if lightning would strike at any moment. I felt like a man standing next to an empty mass grave, intuiting that the massacre would soon begin, but not exactly how or why. I pointed at the vending machine in horror with a trembling finger. Alexis instantly went silent, staring at the dismembered stump of a hand for a long moment. Then she took out her phone and began to dial 911. "The police are on their way," she told me, her face pale. Others had streamed out from the break room. They all stood around with blank expressions on their faces, like sheep packed into a herd as they waited for the butcher. "Who would have done such a thing?" the janitor said as he came up to me with his broom and dustpan, his ancient eyes watery and squinted. He walked slowly with a bent back. His light wisps of white hair blew slightly as he went up to the vending machine and put his nose right against the glass, peering at the hand as if it were a great work of art at a museum rather than a rotting piece of biological waste. "Hey, there's a wedding ring on it," he said. I stopped my pacing around the hall at that. Slowly I walked over to the vending machine and pressed my face close to the glass. The janitor was right. There was an engraved gold ring with writing wrapped around the outside of it. I squinted, trying to make out the words. I took out my pocket notebook from my shirt and clicked a pen open, scribbling the letters down and trying to make sense of them. "Y," I muttered to myself. A few people gave me strange looks, but most just stood there without speaking. I could only make out the first few words. "To my true love, Lou," I read on the paper. I showed it to the janitor. He grunted. "Well, that doesn't help us a lick," he said in his quavering voice. "Not a goddamn lick." "Lou?" Alexis said, looking at the note over my shoulder. "Maybe it's Lucius." I looked up at her quickly. That actually seemed to fit. "You mean the president of our building?" I asked, knowing the answer. Of course. Lucius Unvehi. But I wondered how his ring could have ended up on a dismembered hand in the vending machine. "Penesiges. The police will be here any minute," Alexis said. "They'll take care of it and find out what the ring says. Maybe it will help them bring it back to the family of the owner." I pulled out my phone, nervously checking the time. "It's been 10 minutes since you called," I told Alexis. "And I still don't hear any sirens. "It's probably just a traffic jam," a woman said from the crowd standing around the break room doorway. "Maybe someone should call again, just in case," another faceless voice from the back of the crowd offered. The old man tapped lightly on my shoulder. I turned to look at him. His dark eyes shone with intelligence and wisdom. "You're Henry, right?" he asked. I looked down on him with his crooked back and trembling, age-spotted hands. He must have only stood 5 feet 6 inches. He looked so light that a strong breeze might blow him away. I nodded. "Did you find this evidence here?" I nodded again, wondering what he was getting at. I had begun to sweat, and the feeling of electricity and pressure in the air kept getting stronger, if that was even possible. Something instinctual deep inside me told me to run, not just run from the dismembered hand and my co-workers, but run far away from this building before the pressure blew it apart like a faulty submarine hull at the bottom of the ocean. I took a deep breath, looking around at my co-workers and their staring, curious eyes. I knew if I ran off in terror, they'd probably never let me live it down. I tried to calm myself, but I felt shaky and my heart kept racing. I couldn't bring myself back to a sense of inner peace. "And you are?" I asked the old man in a quivering voice. In his pressed blue janitor's suit, he made a neat, grandfatherly figure. "Alvin," he said, shaking my hand with a strong grip. His slim old fingers wrapped around my hand and squeezed surprisingly hard. Yet I felt the slight tremors in that grasp, radiating into my arm. "Henry, can I talk to you? In private?" he said, his head shaking slightly. I nodded, feeling surreal and dissociated. Alvin turned and began to limp slowly down the hall. A few doors down stood a mostly empty broom closet, except for a few large buckets of chemicals shoved into a corner next to a small rolling cart filled with rope, tape, box cutters, screws, and a few other odds and ends. I sat down on one of the large chemical buckets, using it as a stool. I saw Alvin do the same, pulling a heavy bucket of floor cleaner forward with a grunt. "Do you believe in God, Henry?" Alvin asked. I shrugged. "I don't really know," I said, taken aback. "I guess not. I believe in science. You know, evolution and the Big Bang and everything." He nodded sympathetically. "Well, Henry, I can tell you there is a God. In fact, there are many. Do you feel that pressure in the air?" he asked. "That sense of energy?" "Yeah," I said. "I figured it was just a thunderstorm approaching." He laughed at that, a wheezy, chortling sound that shook his frail body. "No, it's nothing of the sort," he responded, shaking his head. "Did you try looking outside yet? What does that have to do with anything?" I asked. "It has to do with everything," he said. "I just looked out the window before you all started shrieking. There's only darkness out there and strange shapes moving around in it, Henry. It's just blackness as far as the eye can see. It's like the buildings floating in the middle of, well, I don't know exactly what. Maybe hell." I scoffed at that. "You're insane," I said. "There's no one coming," Alvin said, seemingly unperturbed. His old dog's eyes looked far away, as if seeing through the walls of the closet. He looked like a man with no hope. "No help is coming. We're stuck here in this building. When I looked out the window before I found you all gathered in the hallway, well, something was out there in the darkness, looking back. I don't know exactly what I saw. I thought for a moment I must have been dreaming or having a stroke until I came out and saw that hand. You were all screaming and calling for the cops. But when I looked outside, for the first few seconds, it was like the city buildings flashed on and off, becoming translucent. I could see right through them, into a blackness that stretched forever out into the horizon. There were things crawling through that darkness, pale things that twitched and writhed underneath the city streets. They looked like giant worms with teeth and blood-red eyes, their bodies the color of maggots. A foul black syrup constantly seemed to drip from their gaping mouths, and they constantly snapped at each other, the larger ones tearing pieces off the smaller ones. As the last of the buildings faded out, I saw something hovering above the dark horizon. It hovered high over the pit of abominations thrashing below. It looked skeletal, with its arms and legs stretched out like Jesus on the cross, and yet it just hovered there, unmoving. It had red eyes, flat and shining like rubies. Its mouth constantly chattered. It reminded me of a wind-up toy I used to have as a kid. It was just this big mouth, and you would wind the spring back, then the teeth would chatter in this eerie, staccato way. Somehow, I thought I could hear the teeth gnashing and biting even behind the window. It felt like staring into an aquarium filled with sharks and Portuguese man-o'-wars just inches away, looking back through the glass. Except these things were far worse than any sharks. I just hope that those things that are outside, well, I hope they stay there, Alvin said. He looked genuinely distressed, and I wondered whether I was dealing with a mentally ill man. Whatever I saw wasn't human. This thing looked ancient and powerful, and when I saw it, it saw me too. I know it did. I heard its voice in my head, like the shrieking of tearing metal. It sounded harsh and deep and slow. I wanted it to stop. I wanted to rip into my own head and make that voice stop speaking. I felt like shadowy fingers ran up and down my back when it spoke. It said to me, "I am the God of the shadows, the firstborn in darkness, the eternal, and agony follows me as the moon follows the path of the stars. Where will you go to escape the death perched over your head like a swinging axe? Tell those inside that there is no escape. There is no hope of release." We sat in silence for a long moment. I looked at him, contemplating his words. Then I got up without a backwards glance and started to leave. "Great story, Alvin," I said contemptuously. "But I'm going to see if the cops are here yet. You do what you want." He didn't respond, and yet, when I opened the closet door, I found the hallway empty. I looked up and down the long white corridor. Frowning, I saw the hand still perched in the vending machine, sitting in a slot in front of a bunch of Snickers. The machine claimed the hand cost $1.50. I had an absurd urge to put my credit card in the machine and buy it. The gold ring, after all, had quite a bit of value, and the police were taking their sweet time getting here. I looked at the clock on the wall, realizing 20 minutes had passed. "Where the hell are they?" I muttered to myself, going to the nearest window about 20 feet away. I looked outside and froze. The old man was right. There was nothing. It felt like staring into an endless sky without stars or planets or even dust. But things moved in that darkness. Oh yes, I saw lots of things moving, barely glimpsed most of the time, like shadows dancing over darkness, and yet horrible even to glimpse. A hand grabbed my shoulder and I jumped. I spun, seeing a man I had never seen in the office before. He wore a black suit and sunglasses. His shoes had been polished to a reflective sheen. He had close-cropped dark hair, and his skin looked tanned and rough, like leather left out in the sun for too long. "Don't look," he whispered. "When you see them, they also see you." "What in the hell is going on right now?" I asked, terrified. "And who are you? I've worked here for 5 years, and I've never seen you before." A door clicked open down the hallway, and the man pulled a compact Uzi from his inner jacket. He spun in a blur and raised the gun. "Identify yourself," he cried. I saw Alvin peeking out of the broom closet, his watery eyes wide and scared like a child's. "I'm just the janitor," Alvin said. "Put down the gun," I said. "That's just Alvin. He's worked here for 30 years. The man slowly lowered his Uzi, turning back to face me. Alvin meandered over to stand next to us, looking like a kicked dog. His head was bowed, and he kept giving the newcomer worried glances, as if he thought the man might turn and shoot him on the spot. "I'm Agent Kleiner," the man said. "I work with the cleaners." "The cleaners?" I asked. "Is that a janitorial company?" He laughed uproariously at that, a booming sound that echoed down the hallway. "No, nothing of the sort. I guess you could say we are part private military group and part government agency. But we don't publicize ourselves. Our job is to track and contain anomalies, and this building has been off the chart for the last few days in terms of anomalies. Our readings show increasing electromagnetic energy surrounding the structure, and quite a few bodies have been found mutilated in the area." "I didn't hear anything about that in the news," Alvin said conversationally. He had decided that the man wasn't going to hurt him, and now perked up, smiling and showing us his nearly toothless gums. "How come they didn't report it if people got killed?" Agent Kleiner stared down at Alvin through his shaded sunglasses. He towered over Alvin's small 5'6" frame by at least 9 inches. I saw thick muscles filling out the suit, bulging beneath the thin cloth. "Because," he responded, as if speaking to a child, "we didn't allow it to go to the news. So how do we get out of here?" I asked. Agent Kleiner opened his mouth to say something when a shriek of agony and terror rang out through the hall. It went on for a few seconds, deafening, as if someone were being burned at the stake. It abruptly cut off. A coughing, choking sound faintly echoed down the hall, and then it was quiet again. I could hear my heart thudding loud in my ears, beating like a bass drum. I saw someone dragging themselves out of an office room. The figure crawled on the floor, leaving trails of frothy blood streaming behind them. I saw long blonde hair falling over her face, fully covering her features, but I still recognized her instantly. It was Alexis, the secretary. She gurgled as she came near, sounding like someone with a slit throat trying to breathe. "Holy shit, Alexis, what happened? Do you need medical attention?" I cried, running forward to go help her. Agent Kleiner put a strong hand on my arm and pulled me back. I spun to face him, terrified and angry. "Don't get near her," he whispered, aiming the gun at Alexis. "Stay the fuck back, friend. I'm warning you. That's not the person you think it is. Not anymore." She continued to crawl towards us, her bare hands and feet making strange clicking noises on the hard linoleum as she went. A slight breeze blew down the hallway, moving the long hair away from her face. I saw it and screamed. Alexis had no eyes. 2 empty sockets stared up at me, lidless and crying blood. Her lips and nose had been cut off. I saw strange black spidery legs peeking out through the holes. They writhed and wriggled and then withdrew back into her skull. She opened her mouth and vomited black, stinking fluid down her chin without slowing. Agent Kleiner raised his gun and fired. The Uzi hummed like a sewing machine. Its bullets came out so fast I could barely tell one from the other. Its automatic fire blew apart her face and chest in a single spray. She collapsed on the floor, her half-naked body kicking and shaking. Her face had become a mask of bone splinters and cratered flesh. The bullet had torn through her forehead and neck, yet she managed to open her mouth and laugh. As she did, a torrent of blood rushed out. Something black and skittering sat in the middle. It looked like a giant spider the size of a baseball with dozens of wriggling legs. It had 2 red eyes on stalks like those of a snail. Long, curving pincers clicked open and closed in front of a hideous, gaping mouth. filled with sharp teeth covered in some black, stinking fluid. It turned to us and gave a high-pitched hissing noise. The abomination appeared like the world's ugliest baby, born in a pile of bloody afterbirth and now crying out for the first time in its new world, its mother's crumpled body laying in a heap behind it. Even though this happened a few months ago, thinking about that abomination still gives me chills. God, kill it! I screamed at Agent Kleiner. He calmly raised his automatic rifle and fired a spray of bullets at the squirming black mass. It looked like a skittering tumor, running across the floor in a blur, its thin, spiky legs reaching out a foot below it and propelling the alien face and thorax high above the floor. The bullets followed the abomination in a trail, but some predatory instinct in the creature kept it one step ahead of the shattering floorboards behind it. It ran under the vending machine with the dismembered hand in it. I swore. Are there more of those things in here? What the hell is that? I hate spiders! I screamed. Agent Kleiner ignored my outburst. Damn it! Now I have to get it out. Agent Kleiner complained, as if he were only speaking of a trapped housefly rather than a mutated alien spider. One of you guys will have to go around the other side and try to scare it in my direction. What do you think this is, a blue jay? I asked sarcastically. There is no goddamn way I'm getting anywhere near that thing. I took a step back for emphasis. I hated spiders, and this thing was far worse than any spider I had ever seen. The problem solved itself when the skittering black mass ran out, heading straight at Alvin's steel-toe work boots. It hissed and spat, biting into the composite material and denting it. Alvin began to scream and shake his leg, but the creature hung on with its fangs clamped firmly in place, its pincers working furiously to dig through the hard material. Dark, fetid saliva ran from its mouth as it continued to hiss at him and try to bite its way through the metal. Agent Kleiner calmly walked over and stomped on it. It flipped over in an instant and wrapped its legs around his shoe. He put his full weight down quickly, smashing it against the floor, but it wouldn't die. It continued to hiss louder, and more black fluid dribbled out of its open, fanged mouth. He finally kicked his foot forward to try to get it off, but the alien spider had other ideas. It twisted its dozens of legs around and pulled itself to the top of Agent Kleiner's leather shoe in a blur. Then it started to run up his leg. Agent Kleiner's mask of nonchalance quickly broke. I shared his instinctual sense of horror, backing up quickly. A look of panic transformed his face. He pointed the Uzi straight down as if he would shoot off his own foot. But at the last second, his instincts and professional training seemed to take over. In a move nearly as quick as the spider's, he lowered the gun to the side of the spider's body and fired as it ran up his shin. It had started to open its clicking black pincers, aiming to bite deeply into Agent Kleiner's leg. Bullets whizzed fractions of an inch from his skin, digging deep craters into the hallway's white walls. The spider exploded like a water balloon filled with black sludge. The disgusting slime went everywhere. It painted the bullet-riddled wall next to the vending machine with random splotches of alien blood, like a Rorschach ink blot from a nightmare. Its face landed nearly intact at my feet, its long, curved pincers still opening and closing slowly, its red eyes on stalks still twitching. I quickly backed up away from the nightmare. "Let's get the hell out of here," I said quickly. Agent Kleiner nodded. "Yeah, we might as well go investigate," he said lazily. He opened his jacket and pulled out a fresh clip for the Uzi. Agent Kleiner began to walk down the hall. At the end of it stood a massive office, with dozens and dozens of computers and desks. I walked into the room. Monitors and mousepads in private work areas stretched all the way to the front wall. A smell almost like stink bugs, starter fluid, and copper seemed to emanate from somewhere. It wasn't overpowering, but the odor made my stomach do flips. I felt some kind of instinctual revulsion, To my surprise, I saw every one of the seats filled with co-workers. I recognized all of them, at least by face, if not by name, and yet no one spoke or moved. They sat as still as corpses. The fluorescent lights above began to flicker violently. Facts. I saw all the computers turned on, the monitors showing strange, dark colors, spinning in dark, kaleidoscopic fractals, zooming forever inwards towards the center. Agent Kleiner, Alvin and I began to move slowly forwards, towards the first line of desks. I saw an acquaintance I knew from the computer programming department, a balding, mousy man with glasses that made his eyes seem to bulge out of their sockets. I felt a strong urge to call out his name and see if he was alive, but something in me told me to wait. Agent Kleiner had the Uzi raised. I could feel the hairs rising all over my body, as if electricity flowed through the air itself. As we got closer to the computer monitors, the colors flowing across the screen seemed to darken and speed up. Shades of black and dark ruby red dripped and melted until all of the light had been leached away. Then the monitors just showed the darkest void. In the glass screens, the black background made a perfect mirror. I could see the faces of some of the people closest to me. I repressed an urge to scream. I silently ran up to my acquaintance from the programming department and saw my fears confirmed. All of the people had their eyes cut out. Their faces had been slit from ear to ear across their cheeks. It formed a wide, bloody smile. Flaps of mutilated skin hung down. The grinning teeth behind the wounds chattered endlessly. I caught glimpses of spiky, insectile legs reaching out through the holes in their skin. A few black legs would quickly appear out of an eye socket or out the side of a mutilated cheek, then disappear in a blur. The screens all changed at once, a figure forming in the perfectly black backgrounds of the monitors. I saw a skeletal, chattering figure with red eyes that glowed with an eerie inner light. It held its arms and feet out, as if it were crucified. Its dark crimson robe fluttered around its body, as if blown by a random breeze passing through the abyss. Thread-like wisps of translucent red light shimmered and rippled around his bones. On all the screens, I saw the face turn towards me, the ruby eyes staring deeply. I could feel a sickly, diseased presence invading my mind. A voice like grinding metal and roaring engines sounded between my ears, vibrating my body down to the bone. I see you very well. Soon your soul will serve the Red Messiah, a voice like a rushing waterfall screamed into my brain. My ears seemed to ring. I thought my head would explode from the pressure of it. But then, as quickly as it had begun, it cut out. The teeth of the skeletal monster on the screens chattered in time with those of the mutilated people all around us. I wondered if anyone else in the building was still alive. All of my co-workers began to rise at once, as if they were synchronized dancers. With jerky, shaking movements, they pushed out their chairs and turned to face us. Fear rose within my heart. I wanted to run. I took a step behind Agent Kleiner, who continued to survey the transformed mob calmly behind his mirrored shades. He moved his head slightly towards Alvin and me. He reached into his inner jacket pocket with his left hand, slowly grabbing something and pulling it out. I couldn't see the object clutched tightly in his fist, his knuckles turning white from the tension, but I figured he had a plan. I let out a long sigh of relief. "Get ready to run," he whispered, "as fast as you can." His face remained stoic and nonchalant, never changing. He threw the object. It gave a long beep as it flew through the air. I only glimpsed it for a moment, but it looked like some sort of futuristic grenade. It had a long green handle and various flashing lights at the top. It reminded me of a miniature scepter, except with the jewels replaced by bright lights. It flew towards the nightmarish crowd in wide, lazy revolutions. Every single eyeless abomination in that room began to run at us then. Their hissing and spitting sounded just like the sounds of the spider creature Kleiner had killed, except magnified into 100 voices. I turned to run and didn't look back. Agent Kleiner quickly overtook me, sprinting out the door. I heard Alvin puffing behind me, his breathing ragged and heavy. Luckily, we had a small head start. As I went left into the hall, sprinting down the white linoleum, I saw a flash of light and felt a wave of heat. A moment later, an ear-shattering boom rang out. The floor shook and walls cracked. I fell forward on my face, smashing my forehead. The world went dark for a long moment. All I could hear was my breathing, but I smelled thick, cloying smoke. Slowly, my vision began to return. My head throbbed as if vice grips were pressed to my temples. I raised my head and looked back towards the large office room and gasped. The walls had turned black and crumbled to pieces all around the entrance. The floor had collapsed. Cracks curved their way down the hallway, looking like snakes made of shadow. All the windows looking out on the endless void had blown out in a 50-foot circle around the office room's door. Somehow that seemed worst of all. Would those strange abominations witnessed in the void crawl in now that our defenses had been breached? I hoped not, but I wondered whether perhaps they already had. I saw Alvin behind me, slowly rising to his feet. Agent Kleiner strode forwards, covered with a light layer of dust but otherwise totally unharmed. I groaned, and he reached out and helped me up. "Stop complaining," he said. "Now if those spider things had caught you, then you'd have something to complain about." "Are we trapped here forever?" I asked, putting my fingers to my forehead. I pulled them back and saw a few drops of fresh blood. I felt lucky that was the only injury I had suffered. "And what do you guys carry, nuclear grenades?" "Do you think I would come here if I didn't have a way home?" Agent Kleiner asked, raising an eyebrow. "And no, it's not nuclear. It's something new. No radiation. They're called positrons." "You could have got us out of here the whole time?" Alvin interrupted, color rising in his pale, withered cheeks. His eyes looked red and irritated. I figured the smoke from Agent Kleiner's grenade had caused it. "Why didn't you just take us out of here at the beginning?" Agent Kleiner shrugged his muscular shoulders, his expression bland and apathetic as he looked down at the small man. "I had a job to do," he said. "I told you that at the beginning. The agency didn't think they needed more than one cleaner to handle this anomaly. I mean, I'm sure they didn't realize how far advanced it was, but of course this isn't the first time I've had to escape something like this." We walked down the hallway towards where this had all started. I saw the door to the broom closet still stand open a few inches. I must have not closed it completely during the chaos of the day. I peered in, making sure no torn, eyeless faces looked out on us. I stopped suddenly, realizing there was a figure in there. It looked like it was levitating a couple of feet off the ground. "What the?" I said. Agent Kleiner and Alvin stopped a few feet in front of me, turning to look. Alvin gave an uncharacteristically wicked smile. I saw his sharp teeth glistening behind his pulled-back lips. I flung open the door and saw Alvin's dead body hanging from the ceiling. The rope had been tied to a large pipe that ran overhead. It looked like he had committed suicide with the rope in the closet, but I knew it could have been a homicide. His swollen purple face bulged over the tight noose pulled around his neck. The tip of his black tongue stood out between his cyanotic lips, his staring pupils dilated and blank. Then I saw the note, and I felt my suspicions of suicide confirmed. Agent Kleiner and I looked at the fake Alvin, backing slowly away from him. His face started to age, as if some video of a human face ran on fast forward. His eyes grew more and more sunken, His flesh started to wither and pull back, and after a few moments it became the face of a skeleton. The lips turned black and rotted off in pieces, the sharp teeth underneath lengthening as the jaw chattered. The skin on the face grew drier and older before falling off the skull in clumps, looking like old discarded leather laying on the floor. The desiccated corpse in front of us began to give off a smell that quickly permeated the hallway, an odor like embalming fluid with subtle notes of cinnamon and pistachio, like a mummified body. A sense of revulsion ran through me as I tried to breathe through my mouth, gagging slightly as I backed away. Its clothes melted into a dark red robe, the last mask of the janitor dripping away as the monster fully revealed itself. The dark blue janitor's uniform seemed to suck into its skeletal body, dissolving in patches as if acid had eaten through it. Underneath, I saw the robe forming, its hood down to show its full head. Random cracks ran through the top of its skull. I saw a pale red light shining out. It looked like it had some powerful light bulb in the center of its head, its ruby eyes glowing dark as its jaw began to chatter ceaselessly. "Whatever happens, don't let it invade our world," I whispered to Agent Kleiner, transfixed with horror as I stared into those soulless reptilian eyes. "I did not invade your world. I was invited," the creature hissed. Agent Kleiner raised the Uzi and fired, pulling me into the broom closet and locking it. I don't know if he hit the creature or not. I saw the bare bulb overhead, still turned on from earlier, slightly swaying now with the gentle wind. A frenzied pounding began at the door. I feared it would crack open at any moment. Agent Kleiner pulled out something from his inner jacket. It looked like a walkie-talkie with intertwining silver and gold threads running across its length. Underneath the threads, I saw a flat, glassy obsidian surface with pyramid and spiral-shaped buttons running up and down its sides. He pressed a pyramid-shaped button on the top. I grabbed the note from next to Alvin, as Agent Kleiner grabbed me with his left hand. He kept an iron grip on my arm. "Get ready," he said as the door burst open in an explosion of splintered debris. I felt shards of wood hit me in the face and neck, and I flinched. The Red Messiah ran in, thousands of those abominable hissing spider creatures skittering across the floor behind him. As his skeletal arms reached out to grab me, I felt myself rising through the ceiling at an amazing speed. I looked down and saw the building falling away, like an elevator with its cable cut. A sense of vertigo caused my stomach to flip as I flew up and up, Agent Kleiner still holding my arm. He had the Uzi on a strap around his shoulder, and in his other hand he held the alien walkie-talkie device, the one that had saved our lives. I wondered where his agency got such toys, and then I figured I was better off not knowing. A few moments later, the world returned with a popping sound. I felt myself dropped a couple of inches onto the sidewalk. I landed heavily, nearly falling, but Agent Kleiner put out a steadying hand. "Yeah, the first time is always a little weird," he said, smirking. "That thing never gets you perfectly on the street. It's always dropping people from slightly above it. Hell, my partner nearly broke his ankle rolling on an empty vodka bottle last time." I felt speechless, like I'd just suffered 1,000 years of hell and then woken up to find it was only a dream. I looked around, seeing I stood in front of the office building, but when I looked back, I only saw an empty lot covered with garbage and debris. It was as if the building had never been there at all. A fence with graffitied boards and razor wire surrounded the property. I saw a sign on it. Squinting, I moved nearer. "Coming soon, the Church of the Living Messiah." I looked around and saw no signs that the construction had begun. I pulled out my phone and found nothing about the office. No one I knew remembered it or me working there. It was as if someone had erased it from reality, except for in the minds of two scarred people. I looked down at the note Alvin had written before his death, hoping for some answers. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry for everything. Lucius convinced me to help him summon the Red Messiah. He and his cult members said summoning the being would bring us power over the world. As part of the ritual, Lucius had to give a piece of his flesh as an offering. He chose his left hand, and I put it in the vending machine so as to let the terror of the lambs and fools mix with the power of the Red Messiah as his consciousness filtered into the building. I saw the Red Messiah take over Lucius's body after the ritual finished. His clothes just melted, as if burning away. Then his skin started melting too. Underneath I saw the Skeleton King, the Red Messiah, and I knew I had made a mistake. The horror of seeing that thing once would give me nightmares for years. If we let it take over the world, well, the dead would be the lucky ones in that case. I don't know if Lucius is still in there somewhere, screaming and crazed. But I know now that I was wrong. No amount of power is worth this. God forgive me. I gave Agent Kleiner the note as black sport utility vehicles rushed in, securing the area. Dozens of men in dark suits with mirrored black sunglasses appeared. They came up to Agent Kleiner and congratulated him on a job well done, telling him he had, once again, contained the spread of the anomaly. I could only stand there, hoping the agents spoke truthfully, because if the Red Messiah escaped into our world, then Alvin's note would be right. The dead would be the lucky ones in that case. A girl I'd been seeing suggested that, for our third date, we take a bottle of wine, a laptop, and a scary movie to the most remote graveyard we could possibly find. As horror movie aficionados, we both felt jaded and immune to fear. So putting ourselves into the ideal situation for terror sounded like an exciting adventure. The proposed night came, and she drove us an hour out into deep backcountry, heading for a graveyard that we had found in ancient public record, but which was not on any map. When we finally found its supposed location, we ended up having to park 3 miles away behind some large undergrowth. There had been no other place to turn off along the forested country road. The night air was cool, though, so the walk wasn't bad. We walked down a kind of raised ridge of dirt towards the unmarked graveyard, trying not to slip off into the pools of sludge and undergrowth on either side. The trees ringed an open double hill that led up into darkness, and the century-old gravestones sat about in silence. We set up our laptop on a blanket, unafraid, and started the movie. The atmosphere was powerfully creepy, but I still felt nothing, until the unexpected happened. Less than 10 minutes into the movie, we saw a pickup truck go by on the country road outside the graveyard. We could see its lights through the trees as it passed, the only vehicle we'd seen that night. We shrugged, thinking nothing of it, until it came back the other way. Its headlights were distinctive. It was definitely the same truck. When it approached the dirt ridge to the graveyard, moving very slowly, I closed the laptop, and we froze as its headlights fell on us for a moment. The truck backed up, apparently turning around, and then proceeded to park right outside the entrance. We couldn't be sure if they had seen us, and we certainly had no idea what they were doing. I suggested we pack up, and my date agreed. We had just gathered all of our things when the truck went dark. We stood there in the pitch black for a few moments, confused. Who was in the truck? Had they seen us? Were they coming this way? There was no other way out of this graveyard. The hill was surrounded by what amounted to impassable swamp. I started imagining how we might escape through it regardless, but I realized that the attempt would make far too much noise. We'd never make it. We had no choice. Carrying our stuff, I grabbed her free hand with mine. We crept forward along the dirt ridge, wincing at every dried leaf that our shoes crumpled. I could see the truck's dark outline parked in our path, but I heard nothing. There was nothing else to do but creep past the truck, which we did slowly, one silent and carefully placed step at a time. I kept trying to discern shapes inside the truck, but saw nothing but darkness. I looked around constantly, but heard and saw nothing. Still, in the pitch-black night, I could hardly see the girl I was with, let alone somebody creeping about or following us. We made it past the truck, but the lack of any incident only increased our fear. Where were the truck's occupants? What were they doing? They had to be out here somewhere, meaning we were out here in the middles of the night and nowhere, playing a potentially deadly game of hide-and-seek. My heart pounded even harder as I led her down the road toward our car. Where the hell were they? We were maybe half a mile down the road when we heard a scream in the woods and a distant gunshot. In that moment, we both immediately realized what was happening. The truck's occupants hadn't been here for us at all, but they would never let us leave if they knew we were here. We both started running in total panic, and actually made it another mile or two before we saw the truck's distinctive headlights coming up on us. I grabbed her, jumped off of the road, and dove into the undergrowth and sludge between the trees. We peered through the bushes, waist-deep in mud, and watched the truck go by. To our horror, the truck began to slow. I dropped the blanket. They'd seen it on the side of the road. The truck stopped there, only a few feet away, for what seemed like an hour. At any moment, I expected its occupants to get out and come for us. Instead, finally, amazingly, it pulled away and sped on down the road. I tried to see its license plate, but couldn't see anything through the glare of its lights. When I was convinced it was gone, we slogged out and started walking toward our car again. It was then that I had a horrible thought. What if they had found her car? What if they were waiting there? I talked it over with her, and we decided to find a good hiding spot in the muddy undergrowth and literally wait the entire night. We had heard a gunshot. This was serious. Neither of our cell phones had reception. There was no choice. The hours passed, and the longer we felt safe, the sillier we started to think ourselves. There had to have been another explanation, right? Even if there was something horrible going on in the woods, the truck's occupants couldn't have found our car. Or even if they did, they wouldn't wait so long, would they? After 2 hours, we almost talked ourselves out of our cold, horrid hiding place, until I heard a slight sound like shifting gravel. I peered intensely at the road. It was the same truck, lights off, engine off, rolling ever so slowly along in the night, waiting, looking and listening for the fools that almost gave themselves up. It was noon the next day before we felt safe enough to leave our hiding spot and begin the confused and terrified walk back to civilization. My stepdad, Carl, hates me. There's just no other way to put it. "Matt, if you don't like it, go and live with your dad," Carl would yell, squinting at me through his wire-rimmed glasses, arms folded. "I don't know where he is, though. I don't know him. He left when I was 7, I'd reply. "That's not my problem, is it? I'm the breadwinner in this household, so if you want to live here, you'll do as I say. The chore schedule is strict. Sweeping, doing the dishes, washing the car, dusting, vacuuming." Invariably, Carl would find some fault with the quality of my work and call a house meeting to make clear that the piece of gravel he found on the kitchen floor was not acceptable. Had I even done the chores at all? Or was I lying? My mum would sit there, eyes downcast, letting him get through his spiel. Evie, his daughter, my stepsister, would hover by the doorway, waiting to dash out of the room when he'd had his say. I learned long ago that there is no way to win the argument, so I'm deferential and apologize and say it'll never happen again. But it will. When he's out at his job as a mobile mechanic, I say as much to my mom, and she's well aware. He has his flaws, but he's practical, and in his heart he's good. He's been the closest thing you've had to a father, Matt. He took that responsibility when he didn't have to. She'd say, soothingly, "In your heart, you're good, but you don't treat Evie like he treats me." I'd respond, "Evie has a mother who shares the burden. It isn't my fault my dad ran away. That's how the conversation goes. Around and around in circles. In fairness, my stepdad can be a dick to Evie too. He restricts our internet access. He doesn't let us have sugary snacks. He makes us lock our phones away in a cupboard at 9 p.m. sharp and sends us to bed. He bangs on the bathroom door if he deems we've been in the shower too long. As a result, Evie and I have bonded. The austere rules push us together, and we've got a genuine friendship. She appreciates that I'm more hard done by, so she'll smuggle me biscuits and tell me the Wi-Fi password if she's managed to weasel the information out of Carl. Needless to say, the rules are subject to a degree of flexibility. He buys chocolate biscuits and Doritos for himself and can munch a whole bag in a night, spilling crumbs over the sofa he's sprawled out on. I can hear the TV blaring till midnight sometimes, the drone being broken only by his guffaws. Strict and baleful as he has never laid a finger on any of us. Instead, he smashes objects and writes notes in a capitalized font on the back of envelopes for me to discover in a morning. He screams and shouts in my face, sending the sour stench of his breath my way. I wonder if he's trying to provoke me to hit him, which would be absurd. He's pushing 2 meters tall and heavy-set, and I'm a skinny 17-year-old who's far more interested in reading about battles than fighting them. I'm used to his dramatic outbursts now, so that's why yesterday was so weird. Carl was trying to fix the pipes under the kitchen sink, while Evie pressed him for extra pocket money. He was grumbling and largely ignoring her until she mentioned something about the chest in the basement. Carl stopped his tinkering and slid out from under the counter. He towered over Evie, ominously silent. I was studying at the kitchen table but stopped to watch. Carl's face, usually so snarling and pained when he was angry, was utterly blank. "What did you say?" he whispered. I was just joking. I said I could sell that old chest in the basement to get some pocket money. I'll say this once, Evie. You leave my chest alone. His eyes, cold as frozen planets, bore into Evie's for a moment longer. Then he went back to work. Evie left the room, sobbing. I followed her up to her bedroom, where she was crying into one of her old teddies. I thought I'd be doing him a favor. It's full of his army clothes. People buy that sort of stuff nowadays, don't they? And it'd clear some space. I was trying to be nice. I put my arm around her. I know, Evie, I said. 2 years younger than me and less beaten down, Evie's heart was more open to assault. Still, the coldness of Carl's fury had shocked me. Fuck him. Fuck him. Fuck him. She screamed into her teddy. Say, Evie, shall we see what's in Carl's chest tonight? 3 a.m. She looked at me with vengeful, red-rimmed eyes and nodded. I played on her heightened emotions a little, I'll admit, but the way Carl reacted had me genuinely worried about what he had in that chest. If it was anything that could endanger my mum or Evie, I had to know. The evening passed. Evie and I completed our chores, and I read for an hour before surrendering my mobile phone. I said goodnight to Carl and my mum, and only got one response. It's not worth pointing out who ignored me and who replied. I climbed the stairs and closed my bedroom door. It was far too early to sleep, despite what Carl thought, so I read by lamplight every night until my eyes got tired. The only thing to be wary of were slow creaking noises that might indicate Carl was creeping up the stairs. Reading in bedrooms was also banned, and publicly neither me nor Evie did it. However, Carl had his suspicions, so he'd climb with stealth to a certain point on the stairs to check for a glow beneath either of our bedroom doors. If he saw light, he'd burst into the room hoping to catch us. Therefore, I'd preemptively switch off the lamp and pretend to be asleep at the sound of any unusual noise. Tatusun, once a military man, always a military man, I guess. Carl had spent a decade in the army as an engineer. He'd been deployed multiple times, but never to an active theatre of war. Bowing to his ex-wife's demands, he'd returned to civilian life a year after Evie's birth. Everything I'd been able to glean seemed to indicate Carl had enjoyed his time in the military. The problem is that he never talks about it. He smiles absently, and his eyes go somewhere far away. What had he seen? What had he done? I woke to a gentle tapping at the door. It was time. "Follow my steps," Evie whispered. She'd charted the least creaky path down the stairs, it seemed. We reached the stone slabs of the kitchen floor and gently opened the basement door, careful of squealing hinges. I closed the door behind us and turned on the flickering light. Pressing against the dusty, cobweb-ridden walls, we descended. The basement itself was cramped and filled with tools, shelves, bicycles, shoes, boxes. Evie pulled a picnic blanket off of a bulky mass to reveal a mahogany chest that was curiously dust-free. "He comes down here most nights, you know." She said, "Why?" Evie shrugged and nudged a coded padlock. "Shit. Do you know the code?" I said. "Maybe," Evie said, before twisting 4 numbers into the padlock. It clicked open. "Ha! Dad's army serial number. It's full of army crap, so I assumed that'd be it." "How do you know it's full of army crap?" I asked. "He told me once. Duh. Or at least I think he did. Let's open it and find out." The lid was heavier than we expected. It was 4 inches thick and must have been full of lead. I heaved at one side and Evie heaved at the other until we got it up. Inside, there were no combat fatigues, no dog tags, no boots. It was empty, except for 2 objects, a long black cushion and a human jawbone. "Who's there?" Evie and I stared at each other, then back at the jawbone. "Boy? Girl? Speak." "Can you hear a voice?" I asked Evie. "Yeah. This isn't army stuff. I don't know what this is." I heard a hollow laugh before the voice continued. "He wouldn't have told you about me, his charnel confidant. Such is his shame, for he slew me long ago upon a field far from here." "I don't like it," Evie said. "Who killed you?" I asked the bone. "Her father." "My dad wouldn't kill anyone. That's a lie," Evie wailed. "Shh! You'll wake them." I whispered, "I don't like this. He comes here every night to pray and beg and weep, just as his spawn does. He's certain it was an accident, a firing range mishap, nothing more. Do you believe him? Might he do it again?" "I hate this," Evie said, and went to close the lid, but I held her back, chewing my lip. "Are we in danger?" I asked, and that chilly laugh rattled through my head again. Evie broke my grip and lunged for the jawbone perched on the black cushion. "You dare to touch me!" The chest lid slammed shut on Evie's right arm, halfway along the bicep, shattering the bone. She let out half a scream before passing out and sliding down the side of the chest. A grisly grinding sound came from her trapped arm as it twisted further. A cold sweat burst out all over my body, and I sprang into action, heaving Evie back up from where she'd fallen. "Let her out! Let her out!" The voice had ceased to reply. Summoning all my strength, I squatted down and pressed the lid up. It didn't budge. I adjusted my grip and pushed with everything I had. A dark centimetre grew into 2, then 3, then 4. I glimpsed that grinning bone perched on black velvet before Evie's mangled arm was free, and she slid back onto the basement floor. I let the lid thud shut. I helped her up the basement stairs, fully intending to wake my mom and Carl up, because Evie needed to go to hospital. She was delirious and muttering. When we emerged, she looked at me, her face white as chalk. "Run up the stairs. I was sleepwalking. I fell," she said. It took me a moment to realize what she was doing. Carl would question my role in his daughter's injury. Despite her agony, she'd hatched a plan to protect me from his wrath. I nodded and stamped up the stairs as loud as I could before dashing into my bedroom and closing the door. I leapt into bed just as Evie started yelling from the foot of the stairs. Today has been quiet with everyone at the hospital. At some point, I'll go into the basement and cover the chest with the picnic blanket and sweep some dust around to hide any footprints. I just don't feel like it yet. I'm quite happy rocking back and forth on my bed for now, thinking, what the fuck happened last night?